Mr. Zupa.
Or
Ron Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, how would your administration address the massive failures we've seen in the Department of Children and Families?
Yeah, I combine it with the drug lab scandal, and I combine it with the compounding pharmacy scandal. I think the solution is pretty simple, actually, but it's interesting. The heads of those departments, when they were let go or resigned or moved from the head of the department to a consultancy position, complained about the fact that these problems occurred deep down inside of very big, very large organizations. That was the problem why they didn't find out that they were problems until much later, and they festered and got much, much bigger. The solution is this. My wife works for the Worcester Public Schools, and she is a mandated reporter of child abuse. What I would say is any government employee or any employee that works under a government agency would be a mandated reporter of fraud, abuse, and scandal. When Annie Dugan was doing what she did with the drug labs, her fellow workers knew that she couldn't do that kind of work. It was too much. But they were afraid to say something about it, didn't have whistleblower protection. I would add that as well. So when something is found out, people are mandated to go out and report to local authorities or to yourselves in the media. That will get the problem out initially. It won't stir, it won't fester, it won't create a huge problem. So mandated reporting.
Mr. Bacon?
You know, the first thing I would say is that Massachusetts had an opportunity to fix the Department of Children and Families before the crisis of Jeremiah Oliver's disappearance. There's a children's rights group in Maryland that filed suit against the Commonwealth of Mass almost over just about a year before the Jeremiah Oliver case broke. And the governor and Martha Copley, the Attorney General, rather than reading that brief, which was incredibly compelling and moving to fix what was wrong at the department, fought that brief and made the argument that even though it was, let's call it uncomplimentary with respect to the department, it wasn't bad enough to justify engaging in a settlement discussion. There was an opportunity to fix this before some of the real tragedies came down the road. Now, with respect to what I would have done, I put out a plan as soon as the Jeremiah Oliver case broke that laid out what I would have done. And okay, just checking.
No.
And my plan basically had 5 points. The first thing was, remember, DCF is organized in regions, and each region operates to some extent on its own. Now, what you really need to understand to fix something like that is what's going on in each region, where the soft spots are, and where the opportunities to improve are. And I had 5 key criteria for this. What's the caseload, the average caseload in each region, and how big is the spread between the highest and the lowest caseload? Second, what's the relationship between the daycare providers, the schools, and the police departments in each region? Those are the eyes and ears for the department most of the time. Third, how many grievances are outstanding in each region, and how long have those grievances been outstanding? That tells you a lot about the relationship between management and the folks on the ground doing the work. Number 4, screen in and screen out on child abuse reports. One of the big issues you find is, you know, if you don't know sort of why people are screening them in and why they're screening them out, and have a record with respect to that, you don't necessarily know how each region is actually performing its fundamental task, which is dealing with that issue. You just collect that data, and you could have collected it in 2 weeks. You would have a pretty good idea right
Number
away
5, Mr. Baker?
right away about where the opportunities in each region were to actually fix what was broken.
You want to add number 5 to that at all?
I did, but
Mr. Fisher, you're going to have some time here if you want to rebut that.
Sure. I think that's the typical bureaucratic political solution that's offered by a lot of state officials. You know, top-down review and so forth and so on, and it takes a number of months, and it's out of the news, and the reports come back, and little of anything is done. Mandated reporting. Mandating reporting is the solution. There are other elements that can be looked at. I've talked with people who worked as foster parents. Some interesting stuff. We know that the caseworker follows the individual. They don't go to the home. So I talked to a foster mother who had 3 children, 3 foster children. She was visited by 3 different caseworkers. It seems like it's pretty logistics solution here. The caseworker should be assigned to the home. You know, transfer the paperwork if you need to. It shouldn't have to be visited by 3 different caseworkers to one home. That sounds like a pretty easy fix. But to get that information, it has to bubble up from the people who are there, the foster mothers, the foster fathers. And let's be open and be able to take their information and act upon it. Some pretty low-hanging fruit there.
Just one question. follow-up. Why does reform in Massachusetts always cost more than the system that was already in place? Mr. Baker, I mean, it seems that the legislature has thrown more money at the DCF problem for the last 2 years, and it seems like every time there's a problem, crisis, with our website, more money on top of money. I mean, is this justified? Is it something that is just the way government operates?
I think that's another great example of one-party rule on Beacon Hill. If you don't have what I would call kind of the constructive friction that comes from having both teams on the field engaged in an active public debate about solving problems, yeah, you do end up with solutions that usually end up costing more. Martha Coakley and Steve Grossman are both proposing $2 billion in new spending, which will be followed, of course, by $2 billion in new taxes. That is not the way to solve most of these problems. There's this calculus that says that the problem is always about how much you spend. It's not about how you spend it. I happen to think the opposite. I think in many cases, you start with how you're spending the money, and that's where your big opportunity to chase reform and actually end up with a better product that costs less comes from. And that's certainly the way it's worked, both when I've been in the public and in the private sector.
Mr. Fisher?
I think, Jim, you sort of hit on it. I think this is part of the nature of a government. There is no competition. What's the incentive to do things better, or to do things more efficiently? In a private business, it's there. You either do better, or you're going to get eaten up by your competition. You're going to go out of business. It's part of the free market. That doesn't exist within government. So part of the solution I talked about earlier, being mandated reporters, that gets the problem outside of the system, to the media, to the local authorities. It's not going to be handled up through the chain of command or try to be resolved with a caucus or some sort of a symposium or some sort of a government program. Let's get it outside of government, and then we can talk about real reform and leaner, more cost-saving programs.
Thank you. Next question.
Park here for the debate.
Sure. I assume the press?
Yes, CR News. I'm a shoestring operation. No, I won't CR News.
Okay. I think we're all filled up in here.
There was a spot over there.
Yeah, but obviously the cones are there.
What about that spot on the end there?
That would be the president's spot, so that one's always coned off.
Isn't he in Martha's Vineyard? Oh, the other president, the college
president.
Yeah. I'm joking. All right, so what do I do?
That's a good question. Hang on, let me grab.
I got 20 minutes. I'll hang.
Just follow her.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.